Sydney was never just an assistant, she was operating under deep cover, placed beside Roger as part of a mission so classified that even her silence was a weapon. To him, she was invisible, a nobody in a gray cardigan, someone he could interrupt, belittle, and publicly humiliate without consequence. He mistook her discipline for weakness, her restraint for submission, and when the annual military ceremony approached, an exclusive event where power, rank, and ego filled the room, Roger saw an opportunity to amuse himself. With a condescending smile, he invited Sydney as a joke, fully expecting her to decline or fade into embarrassment. She accepted without a second thought. That alone should have warned him. The night of the ceremony, the hall shimmered with medals and authority until Sydney walked in. Conversations died mid-sentence. She wore a deep blue dress that moved with quiet confidence, her presence commanding without effort. As she passed under the lights, a small trident tattoo appeared on her arm, subtle but unmistakable. Roger's world stopped. The color drained from his face, his jaw tightened, and for the first time, doubt crept into his eyes. That single mark revealed the truth he had never considered. The woman he had mocked was never beneath him. She had been watching him the entire time. And this moment, this shock, was only the beginning of his reckoning. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. The polished mahogany doors of the officers' club swung inward on well-oiled hinges, releasing a blade of cool night air that sliced through the warm, perfumed haze of the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across pressed uniforms and evening gowns, catching on ribbons, medals, and polished insignia. The room vibrated with layered sound, glass on glass, low conversations wrapped in laughter. The controlled confidence of senior officers gathered where power expected to be seen. Near the bar, Admiral Roger Oliver stood at ease, one hand resting on the marble counter, the other cradling a tumbler of scotch. His posture projected ownership, the space spent subtly around him. Officers angled their shoulders toward his voice. Laughter followed his punchlines a half-second too late. He checked his watch, thumb brushing the bezel with impatience. His jaw tightened, then relaxed into a thin, amused smile. He had extended the invitation personally, not as courtesy, as spectacle. Sydney Scott, his civilian assistant, was late, predictable. He imagined her now, apologetic, flustered, overdressed in the wrong way, or underdressed entirely. He had painted her image carefully over months, quiet, awkward, invisible. Useful precisely because she absorbed friction without protest. The joke would land the moment she walked in. A harmless humiliation, he told himself. A reminder of hierarchy. The sound changed before he saw her. Conversations thinned, not all at once, but in collapsing pockets. A fork paused midair, a laugh caught in a throat. The ambient nose didn't fade, it broke, like ice under stress. Heads turned toward the entrance, with the instinctive synchronization of formation responding to contact. She stood just inside the threshold, Sydney Scott. The navy blue silk gown followed the line of her body with disciplined restraint, no excess, no ornamentation. It wasn't the dress that altered the room's chemistry, it was her stance. Feet planted shoulder-width apart, weight balanced over the midfoot. Chin level, shoulders back, relaxed but ready. Her gaze moved, not wandering, not curious but methodical, mapping exits, distances, faces. A predator's scan, slow and economical. The glasses were gone, so was the habitual forward slump Roger had grown accustomed to. In its place was spinal alignment drilled by years of corrective force. Her breathing was barely perceptible, shallow and controlled, ribcage expanding just enough to oxygenate without telegraphing effort. A colonel near the dance floor felt his pulse stutter before he understood why. Sydney stepped forward. Each movement was deliberate, efficient. No sway in her hips, no hesitation in her stride. As a waiter passed, she reached out with her left hand and accepted a flute of champagne without breaking eye contact with the room. The motion shifted the fabric at her upper arm. Ink surfaced under the lights, black, weathered lines. Faded not by age, but by sun, salt, and abrasion. An eagle with wings spread, an anchor, a trident. The insignia didn't announce itself. It existed, and that was enough. The oxygen in the room seemed to thin. A captain's fingers tightened around his glass until the stem creaked. Somewhere near the back, a woman inhaled sharply, then pressed her lips together as if afraid sound might draw attention. Roger Oliver felt heat rise up his neck, then drain away, leaving his skin cold and tight. His hand jerked, scotch sloshed against the rim of the glass. The trident, earned in surf that shattered bone heat. In water cold enough to steal breath. In nights designed to make men quit, women rarer still. His mind rejected it on reflex, scrambling for alternatives: costume, forgery, audacity, but his body betrayed him. A fine tremor flickered at the corner of his right eye. Commander Harris saw it too. Harris moved without hesitation. He cut through the crowd in a straight line, ignoring greetings, ignoring rank. His face was rigid, eyes locked forward. 3 paces from Sydney, he stopped. His heels snapped together with a sound sharp enough to echo. His hand came up in a precise, unhurried salute, elbow angled, fingers tight. "Chief," he said quietly. The word carried weight, not volume. Sydney acknowledged him with a slight nod. Not a smile, not a break in posture. Just a fractional dip of the chin, one professional recognizing another. Harris held the salute a heartbeat longer than regulation before lowering his hand. Roger's throat closed, his tongue felt thick, useless. The room resumed breathing in shallow increments, but the axis had shifted. No one laughed, no one spoke. Eyes tracked Sydney as she moved deeper into the ballroom, the trident slipping back beneath silk as if it had never been exposed. Roger stood frozen, his knuckles pale against the glass. The joke had arrived, and it wasn't funny. The image of Commander Harris saluting her did not fade. It branded itself behind Roger Oliver's eyes, sharp and involuntary, replaying every time he blinked. The angle of the salute had been correct. To distance 3 paces textbook, Harris had not hesitated. Men like Harris didn't improvise respect. They rendered it only when it was owed. Roger's jaw tightened. A small muscle jumped along his cheek, once, then again, an autonomic betrayal he couldn't suppress. 6 months, his mind rewound with clinical precision. Sydney at the coffee machine, every morning at 0600, hands steady, posture neutral. Sydney seated outside his office, typing classified briefs at a pace that never fluctuated. No complaints, no questions that mattered, a presence designed to dissolve into background noise. He had mistaken discipline for weakness, he always did. He remembered the first time he'd raised his voice at her. A misplaced document, one he had signed off on incorrectly. He had leaned over her desk, breath heavy with caffeine, fingers stabbing the air inches from her face. She hadn't flinched, not a blink, just a slight tightening at the corners of her mouth, controlled, suppressed. He'd felt a brief, irritated chill then, something he hadn't examined. Later came the small degradations, correcting her in front of junior officers, assigning menial tasks beneath her GS level. The coffee incident, his hand had slipped, the ceramic mud tipping, dark liquid spreading across the polished floor. He had watched her kneel to clean it, her movements economical even on her knees, spine straight, balance centered. He had called her incompetent while she worked, she hadn't looked up. A waste of taxpayer money, he had said once, savoring the phrase. Her pen had paused for less than a second before continuing. Now the phrase echoed back at him, hollow. He remembered the invitation. The memory surfaced, unbidden, crisp as a recorded transmission. He had tossed the thick card stock across the desk, not handing it to her, letting it strike her chest before fluttering down. "Come along, Sydney," he had laughed, a performative sound meant to be overheard. "Try to dress like you belong to the human race for once. It's a formal event for actual leaders." Her eyes had met his then. Just for a fraction of a second, not offended, not confused, assessing, he had dismissed it, already turning back to his terminal. Now, standing at the edge of the ballroom, Roger tracked her movement through the crowd. She didn't meander. She cleared space, without touching anyone, subtle shifts of angle and timing causing people to unconsciously step aside. She adjusted her path as if compensating for invisible threats, not walking, conducting a clearance. She held the champagne flute in her left hand, not casually. Fingers positioned to avoid constriction, wrist neutral. Her right arm hung free, elbow slightly bent, dominant hand unencumbered, a habit ingrained under stress, not etiquette. Roger swallowed. His throat felt dry, constricted. He took a sip of scotch and tasted nothing. If the tattoo was authentic and Harris's salute suggested it was, then Sydney Scott was not an assistant. She was Naval Special Warfare, and not support, not auxiliary. A trident was not issued, it was survived. Women had only recently breached certain pipelines. Those who did were anomalies, by design, carefully selected. He knew the term, everyone did, though few said it aloud. A unicorn, not rare by chance, rare because the institution demanded it. A faint pressure began building behind his sternum. His breathing shortened without permission, chest rising just a little too fast. He adjusted his collar, suddenly aware of the heat beneath his dress whites. Sweat prickled along his spine. If she was an operator, the question wasn't how she ended up in his office. It was why. Why answer phones? Why absorb abuse? Why remain invisible, unless the role itself was camouflage? Unless every insult, every menial task, every outburst had been logged, catalogued, time-stamped. Unless she hadn't been assisting him at all. Unless she had been observing. The thought tightened his grip on the glass until the tendon stood out across the back of his hand, skin blanching. His pulse thudded in his ears, loud enough to feel. He scanned the room, suddenly uncertain who was watching whom. Sydney paused near the balcony, posture unchanged, gaze steady. For a fleeting instant, her eyes cut in his direction. They didn't linger. They didn't challenge, they acknowledged. Roger's stomach dropped. Predators didn't rush, they waited. And she had been waiting for 6 months. Roger intercepted her just short of the balcony doors, positioning himself between her and the night air as if he were blocking an exit on instinct. The chandeliers overhead cast hard light across his dress whites, igniting the ribbons on his chest in a calculated display of authority. He drew himself up to full height, shoulders back, chin raised, chest expanded the way it had been drilled into him decades earlier. The posture had worked on captains, on civilians, on politicians who needed reminding who controlled the room. Sydney stopped. The distance between them closed to less than a meter. Roger could smell a faint citrus of her perfume beneath the sharper note of champagne. His right eye twitched, a rapid involuntary spasm he felt but could not stop. "What is this, Sydney?" he hissed, pitching his voice just low enough to avoid drawing attention. His lips barely moved. "A temporary tattoo. Is this your idea of a Halloween costume?" For a fraction of a second, she didn't respond. Then she turned. The movement was unhurried, economical, as if she were rotating on an axis rather than pivoting on heels. Up close, the change was unmistakable. The softness he had grown accustomed to, the lowered gaze, the neutral expression was gone. Her eyes were clear and flat, pupils steady. The reflective calm of someone who had learned to regulate adrenaline under lethal stress. There was no fear response, no appeasement, just focus. "Good evening, Admiral," she said. Her voice landed differently, not tentative, not deferential, a smooth, low alto, controlled and even, carrying just far enough to be heard by him alone. It had the cadence of someone accustomed to giving reports under pressure. "You asked me to dress appropriately for the company," she continued. "I simply wore my credentials." Roger's mouth tightened. Heat pooled beneath his collar. A bead of sweat traced a line down from his temple, caught briefly in the crease beside his eye before disappearing into his hairline. "You're a secretary," he snapped, the word sharp, almost desperate. "You type memos." Sydney lifted the champagne flute, her wrist steady, fingers relaxed. She took a measured sip, swallowing once, her throat moving smoothly. "The glass never trembled. I adapt to the mission parameters, sir," she replied. For 6 months, the mission required a secretary. Tonight, the mission required a cocktail dress. The words were precise, deliberate. Roger felt something in his chest tighten, an unfamiliar compression that made his next breath shallow. His rank insignia suddenly felt heavier, as if the metal were pulling against the fabric. She stepped closer. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't theatrical. It was a controlled encroachment into his personal space, calculated to test reaction time. Roger's body responded before his pride could intervene. His heel slid back half a step, the movement small but undeniable. His shoulders stiffened, arms instinctively pinning closer to his sides. Sydney's gaze dropped, not submissively, but diagnostically, taking in the slight asymmetry of his Windsor knot. "By the way, Admiral," she said quietly. "Your tie is crooked. You look sloppy." The insult was delivered without heat. No raised voice, no satisfaction, just an observation, the way one operator corrected another before stepping onto a range. She moved past him, close enough that the silk of her dress brushed his sleeve. The trident was hidden again, but its presence lingered like a phantom sensation. Roger stood frozen, jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. His fists curled at his sides, fingers digging into his palms hard enough to leave crescent impressions. Rage surged first hot, unfocused, then fear, colder, sharper, threading beneath it. He watched her disappear back into the crowd, posture unchanged, head level, already reintegrating into the environment as if the exchange had never occurred. His pulse hammered against his ribs, his breathing stayed shallow. He needed answers, names, files, clearance levels. He needed to know who she really was, and he needed to know it 5 minutes ago. Roger muttered a perfunctory excuse to the cluster of officers nearest him and broke away from the ballroom. The polished laughter and orchestral music dissolved behind him as he pushed through the double doors, his pace accelerating the moment he was out of sight. His shoes struck the corridor tiles with clipped urgency, the sound echoing too loudly in his ears. His breathing was off, short pulls through his nose, exhalations held a fraction too long. The administrative wing was dimmer, quieter, fluorescent lights humming with institutional indifference. He passed a reflective glass panel and caught his own image, face flushed, jaw rigid, eyes sharp with something close to panic. His right hand flexed once, fingers spreading, then curling again, as if testing sensation. The gala ceased to exist. He entered his office and locked the door with more force than necessary. The click of the bolt sounded final. He crossed to his terminal, shedding his jacket without care, tossing it over a chair. The fabric slid to the floor. He didn't notice. The monitor flickered to life. He sat, posture forward, elbows planted, shoulders hunched as if bracing against impact. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then descended to fast, keys clacking out of rhythm. A missed keystroke, a sharp exhale through his nose. He corrected, jaw tightening. He needed her file. Not the sanitized version, the real one. The standard HR database loaded first, familiar blue and gray interface. He typed her name, Sydney Scott, GS5, civilian administrative assistant. Employment history unremarkable, background check clean. No foreign contacts, no disciplinary notes. The kind of profile designed to be skimmed and forgotten. Roger's lips pressed into a thin line. A muscle jumped near his temple. "Bullshit," he whispered, the word barely audible. He initiated an escalation protocol, fingers moving with practiced authority now. Admiral level override, his personal credentials. The system hesitated, then complied. A warning banner flashed and disappeared as he tunneled deeper into restricted directories few on base ever touched. Naval Special Warfare Archives, personnel records segmented behind layered firewalls. He entered her full name again, then her social security number, each digit deliberate. The screen froze. For half a second, nothing happened. The cursor stopped blinking. The hum of the terminal fan seemed louder, intrusive. Roger held his breath without realizing it. The display went black. A single dialog box appeared in the center of the screen, stark against the void. Red border, white text. Access denied. Clearance level, Yankee white. SPECAT, biometric confirmation required. Roger stared. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His pulse spiked hard enough to throb in his throat. Yankee white, the designation surfaced instantly, unbidden. Presidential support detail, proximity clearance, the kind of access granted only after exhaustive vetting, financials, psych evals, polygraphs repeated until patterns stabilized. Special access program, compartmentalized, black. His chair creaked as he leaned back, then forward again, eyes locked on the screen as if it might change. It didn't. The red box remained, unmoved by his rank. "This is impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. His right hand clenched into a fist and came down on the desk. The impact rattled the keyboard. Pain flared across his knuckles, sharp hand grounding, but it didn't help. The implication was already spreading, cold and methodical, deep cover, intelligence, or worse. Internal oversight. He thought of the unlogged meetings. The quiet envelopes exchanged in private offices. The defense contractor dinners that never made it onto official calendars. The drone shielding prototypes overpriced, underperforming approved anyway. The budget discrepancies he had buried under reallocation codes and signed off with confident strokes. He swallowed. His throat felt tight, constricted, as if something were pressing inward. If she was assigned to him, then she hadn't been observing passively, she had been collecting. 6 months of proximity, 6 months of access, 6 months of unfiltered behavior, every outburst, every transaction, every casual assumption of impunity. He couldn't fire her. Termination would trigger review. He couldn't confront her. That had already backfired. His breathing slowed, forced now, each inhale measured as his mind shifted gears. Panic receded, replaced by calculation. He rolled his shoulders once, as if settling into a harness. If she was building a case, then time mattered. Credibility mattered, and credibility could be destroyed. Roger's eyes hardened, reflecting the red warning box still burning on the screen. His jaw set. The fist on the desk relaxed, fingers spreading, tapping once in a controlled rhythm. He didn't need to outrun the truth, he just needed to bury it before it surfaced. Morning light filtered through the narrow windows of the administrative wing in a flat, institutional gray, stripping the office of any warmth. The air felt heavier than usual, stale despite the low hum of the ventilation system. Keyboards clicked, printers whirred, every sound seemed amplified by what went unsaid. Sydney sat at her desk exactly as she always did. Gray cardigan, hair neatly secured, glasses back in place. Her posture was neutral, spine straight but relaxed, shoulders squared without tension. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in a steady cadence, neither rushed nor hesitant. The monitor reflected faintly in her lenses, concealing her eyes. To any casual observer, nothing had changed. Roger noticed everything. He remained in his office, door half open, watching through the glass partition. His hands were folded on the desk, fingers interlaced tightly enough to blanch at the knuckles. His jaw worked once, molars grinding. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. The anger from the night before had cooled into something sharper, calculation. He lifted the phone and waited a full second before dialing, controlling the tempo of his breathing. When the line connected, his voice shifted, measured, paternal, infused with rehearsed concern. "I have reason to believe my assistant may be mishandling classified material," he said to the military police duty officer. His tone suggested reluctance, as if the accusation pained him. "Nothing dramatic, but protocol is protocol. I'd like a discreet search of her workspace while she's at lunch." A pause, a quiet acknowledgement on the other end. "Yes," Roger continued softly, "discretion is key. I don't want to embarrass her if this turns out to be nothing." He ended the call and set the phone down carefully, aligning it parallel to the edge of the desk. His left eye twitched once. He pressed his tongue against the inside of his cheek until it stopped. When Sydney stood to go to the restroom, he tracked her movement with peripheral vision only. No direct stare, no tell. The moment her chair slid back into place and her footsteps faded down the corridor, he moved. His office door opened without a sound. He crossed the short distance to her desk with uncharacteristic speed, pulse sticking high in his throat. The purse hung from the back of her chair, leather worn but clean. He slipped a hand inside, movements economical despite the faint tremor in his fingers. The flash drive was already in his pocket. MK18 submersible schematics, restricted, compartmented, the kind of data that required chain of custody documentation and a courier card logged at every transition point. Possession alone was enough. Intent wouldn't matter, context wouldn't matter. He slid the drive into an inner pocket of the purse and withdrew his hand. The entire act took less than 3 seconds. He stepped back, smoothing the front of his uniform, heart hammering now with a sharp, illicit thrill, career-ending, espionage, treason, Leavenworth. He returned to his office and closed the door. For the first time that morning, a smile touched his lips. It was small, tight, satisfying. Sydney returned moments later. She sat, adjusted her chair, resumed typing. Her breathing never changed. She did not check her purse. She did not glance toward his office. Roger watched her through the glass, his smile deepening. Whatever she was, operator, investigator, phantom rules were rules. Without a courier car, she was finished. Rank and ribbons wouldn't save her from black and white regulation. He stood, straightened his jacket, and stepped into the open office space. His expression had softened into something almost pleasant. "Sydney," he called out. She looked up immediately, attentive, neutral. "Could you come in here?" he said, warmth edging his voice, "and bring your bag. We're going to have a surprise security audit." Her fingers hovered over the keys for a fraction of a second before settling flat on the desk. She stood, reached for the purse, and turned toward his office. Roger's smile held as she approached, but his pulse quickened, anticipation tightening his chest. The trap was set. Sydney entered the office without her purse. The absence registered before Roger consciously processed it. His eyes flicked to her hands empty, then to the chair opposite his desk as she pulled it back and sat with controlled precision. Her posture was upright, feet flat on the floor, knees aligned, hands resting loosely on her thighs. No fidgeting, no hesitation. The door closed softly behind her, the latch settling into place with a muted click that seemed louder than it should have. Roger's smile stiffened. A faint crease appeared between his brows. "I asked you to bring your personal effects," he said, keeping his tone light, conversational. The warmth he had practiced slipped just enough to expose irritation beneath. His right index finger tapped once against the desk, then stilled. "I don't think that will be necessary, Admiral," Sydney replied. Her voice was even, uninflected. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and withdrew a small black flash drive. The plastic caught the overhead light as she placed it carefully at the exact center of his desk, aligning it parallel to the wood grain. The movement was deliberate, precise. Roger's eyes locked onto the object. His throat tightened. A pulse jumped visibly at his neck. "You have clumsy hands, Roger," Sydney said. The honorific absent, stripped away without ceremony. I felt the weight difference in my bag immediately. Standard counter-surveillance instinct. His jaw worked. A muscle twitched near his eye, rapid and uncontrollable. He did not look at her. He could not pull his gaze from the drive. She continued, her tone clinical, as if delivering a briefing to a review board. "On this drive are the schematics you intended to frame me with. Restricted material, Mk-18 submersible platform. Compartmentalized under Naval Sea Systems Command." She paused just long enough for the words to settle. "But if you access the metadata, you'll see they were downloaded from your terminal at 0900 hours. She leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on her thighs, closing the distance by inches. Roger's breath caught, shallow and sharp. "While I was getting you coffee," the silence that followed was dense, compressive. Roger's chest felt tight, as if an invisible band had cinched around his ribs. He inhaled, but the air didn't seem to reach the bottom of his lungs. His fingers curled against the desk edge, nails biting into polished oak. "Did you really think you could burn a Tier 1 operator?" Sydney asked quietly, with a trick from a bad spy novel. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was surgical. Roger's hand moved toward the phone on his desk, reflexive, desperate. "Call the MPS, shout, rewrite reality through volume and rank." His fingertips hovered inches from the receiver. "Don't touch that phone." The command cut through the room, sharp and absolute. Not loud, not angry, final. Roger froze. His hands stopped midair, fingers trembling before slowly withdrawing. His shoulders sagged a fraction, a microscopic collapse of authority. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing once. His breathing remained shallow, uneven. For the first time in his career, Admiral Roger Oliver obeyed an order he had not issued. Sydney straightened, reclaiming her space. Her expression did not change. No satisfaction, no anger, just control. The flash drive sat between them, inert and damning. "Who are you?" Roger whispered. The words escaped him without force, breath leaking between them. His shoulders sagged into the back of the chair, the rigid architecture of rank finally failing. His eyes lifted from the desk to her face, searching for something familiar, something human he could still control. Sydney met his gaze. "My name is Master Chief Sydney Scott," she said. The title was delivered without emphasis, as if it were merely factual data, attached to DevGru, Gold Squadron. "For the last 6 months, I've been operating under the authority of the Inspector General and the Judge Advocate General's office." She stood, the chair legs whispering against the floor. The movement changed the geometry of the room. Roger's eyes tracked her without conscious intent, his head turning slightly as she began to pace. Not aimless, measured, each step placed with intent, heel to toe, as if the office were a briefing space instead of a trap he had built for her. We started seeing anomalies, she continued. Spec Ops deployment schedules appearing in foreign hands. Not leaks, sales, patterns emerged, timing, asset exposure, compromised routes. She stopped near the window, hands clasped loosely behind her back. We needed proof. And more importantly, we needed to understand the character of the individual responsible. Roger's lips parted, his breathing hitched. You were spying on me, he said. The word tasted bitter, defensive. Sydney turned her head just enough to look at him, over her shoulder. I was assessing a threat, she corrected. And you confirmed it. She faced him fully now. Up close, the discipline in her expression was unmistakable. No raised voice, no visible contempt, just controlled clarity. Your operational security was compromised long before I arrived. Unsecured terminals, predictable routines. Casual conversations in unsecured environments, she paused. You compensate for your inadequacies, dominating subordinates. Public humiliation, arbitrary discipline. It creates fear, not loyalty. Roger's jaw clenched. A tremor passed through his right hand, fingers tightening into the armrest. You're insecure, she went on, unflinching, and that insecurity made you sloppy. For a moment, it looked like the words had struck flesh, then something hardened behind his eyes. He straightened abruptly, spine locking, shoulders squaring as if muscle memory had seized control. You have nothing, he snapped. The volume rose, sharp and brittle. A flash drive, that's it. I'll say you stole it, that you manipulated the data. It's your word against mine. He leaned forward, breath hot, eyes bright with desperate conviction. I have friends in the Pentagon, he added. I'll bury you. Sydney didn't react immediately. She lowered her wrist and glanced at her watch. The motion was unhurried, almost casual. The second hand swept smoothly around the dial, ticking audibly in the sudden quiet. Roger watched it too, uncomprehending, his breath shallow, chest rising too fast. You don't have friends, Roger, she said softly. Her eyes lifted to his as the second hand crossed the 12. You have accomplices, a fractional pause. And as of right now, they are all in custody. The color drained from his face, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. His gaze drifted past her, unfocused, as if trying to locate an escape that no longer existed. A bead of sweat rolled down from his temple, tracing the same path as the night before. Sydney held his stare a moment longer, then stepped back, reclaiming distance. The room felt smaller now, compressed by inevitability. Roger slumped, the last of his resistance bleeding out in silence. 3 weeks later, the base auditorium no longer felt ceremonial. The same tiered seating that once held laughter and clinking glasses now held rigid spines and folded hands. Dress uniforms filled the rows, dark blues and muted greens absorbing the overhead light. The air carried the faint smell of floor polish and stale coffee, but beneath it lingered something heavier finality. No one spoke above a whisper, every cough echoed too loudly, every chair creaked like a breach of protocol. Roger sat at the defendant's table beneath the seal of the United States Navy. The space where his ribbons once rested was bare. No chest candy, no command pin, just a plain gray suit that hung awkwardly from shoulders that had lost their squared certainty. His hair, once meticulously groomed, showed streaks of white at the temples. A muscle in his jaw jumped intermittently, the tick sharp enough to be visible even from the gallery. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers spread as if anchoring himself, the knuckles pale from sustained pressure. The evidence screens behind him flickered to life in slow sequence. Audio waveforms froze mid-spike. A paused video frame showed Roger leaning forward, face contorted, finger jabbing toward someone just out of frame. The timestamp glowed in sterile white text. The transfers followed dates, routing numbers, shell accounts layered 3 deep. Every piece fit, nothing redundant, nothing missing. The kind of case built by someone who understood operational discipline and evidentiary chains of custody. When Sydney's name was called, the murmur in the room died instantly. She entered from the side aisle, her service dress blues pressed to razor sharpness. The gold chevrons on her sleeve caught the light as she moved, steady and unhurried. The trident rested over her heart, jump wings above it, polished to a mirror finish. Her ribbons formed a dense, orderly block of color campaigns, commendations, unit citations stacked higher than Rogers had ever been. Her posture was neutral, balanced, the kind drilled into muscle memory over decades. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She did not look at the audience as she approached the stand. Her gaze stayed level, fixed on a point just beyond the judge's bench. When she raised her right hand to swear in, her fingers were still. Not rigid, controlled. Her testimony unfolded with clinical economy. She referenced dates without consulting notes, locations down to room numbers, surveillance and installation methods, ascribed in technical terms non-invasive concealment, existing architectural seams, chain of evidence logging. When audio clips played, her expression did not change. When video footage froze on Rogers' face mid-rant, her breathing remained slow and even, each inhale measured, each exhale silent. Across the room, Rogers' eyes tracked her despite himself. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face, then something closer to recognition. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound followed. His shoulders sagged a fraction, the weight finally settling. The prosecutor's final question landed softly, almost politely, yet it cut deeper than any accusation, whether the Admiral had ever suspected. Sydney turned her head then, just enough to meet Rogers' eyes. There was no triumph there, no satisfaction. Only a flat assessment, the same look she might give faulty equipment before tagging it out of service. Her answer came evenly. No inflection, no embellishment, the truth, stripped of ornament. Rogers' gaze dropped to the table, his fingers curled inward at last, nails pressing into his palm. The tick in his jaw stilled, replaced by a hollow stillness. For the first time, he looked small, not diminished by force, but by exposure. The gavel struck wood once, the sound cracked through the auditorium, sharp and final. The verdict followed, each count read with procedural calm. Dishonorable discharge, confinement, Leavenworth. The words stacked one atop another like sealed doors. Sydney did not react. She stood when instructed, sat when told, and when it was over, she stepped away from the stand without looking back. As she exited, the ribbons on her chest caught the light one last time, then disappeared into shadow. Outside the auditorium, the door closed with a muted thud. The sun was already sinking behind the low concrete buildings when Sydney crossed the parking lot. The light caught the edges of the basin lawn, amber lines, stretching shadows across the asphalt like range markers. Her duffel bag rested against her shoulder, the canvas worn soft from years of movement deployments, temporary billets, places never meant to be permanent. The weight was familiar, reassuring, the disguise was gone. The glasses, the cardigans, the quiet civilian posture she had worn like borrowed skin. Somewhere behind her, in a maintenance dumpster near Admin, it all lay crumpled and discarded. She hadn't looked back when she dropped it in. She never did. Her boots slowed as she reached the black Jeep parked at the edge of the lot. The vehicle was utilitarian, scarred with fine scratches along the doors, dust ground permanently into the seams. It wasn't polished, it didn't need to be, it had never failed her. Commander Harris stood leaning against the hood, arms crossed loosely, cover tucked under one elbow. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes tracked her approach with the same alert focus he'd carried in every operational briefing she ever shared with him. A faint crease sat between his brows, not tension, concentration. It eased slightly when he saw her. "Hell of a show, Sydney," he said. The corner of her mouth moved a fraction, not quite a smile. She shifted the duffel higher on her shoulder before taking his hand. His grip was firm, professional, no congratulatory squeeze, no lingering. "Just taking out the trash, sir," she replied. Harris exhaled through his nose, a quiet sound that might have been a laugh in another life. He straightened, rolling his shoulders back, eyes briefly flicking toward the base buildings behind them. The auditorium was out of sight now, but the echo of the gavel still seemed to hang in the air. "Where to next?" he asked. Sydney reached for the key fob, her thumb pausing for a beat before pressing it. The Jeep responded with a muted click. "Coronado," Harris nodded once, no surprise. No follow-up questions. "Training cycle starts soon, Monday," she said. She opened the driver's door, resting her hand on the frame. "The new recruits need to learn something early." Harris waited. That the battlefield doesn't care about your rank, she finished, only your competence. That earned a tight smile, respect, not sentiment. He stepped back as she climbed into the seat. The leather creaked softly under her weight. She dropped the duffel onto the passenger side and shut the door, the sound solid and final. Before turning the key, she adjusted the mirror. The reflection caught the upper floors of the headquarters building. The Admiral's office window was dark. No desk lamp, no silhouette pacing behind the glass, just an empty rectangle absorbing the last of the daylight. For years, that window had been a beacon of authority lit late, seen by everyone who passed, a reminder of who held power. Now it was just another pane of glass. Sydney's face didn't change. Her jaw remained set, her breathing slow and controlled. Vindication didn't register as relief. It never had. It registered as absence, the removal of a threat. The quiet after corrective action. She turned the key. The engine came to life with a low, even rumble. She shifted into gear without looking back. As the Jeep rolled forward, the heavy base gate began to close behind her. The metal arms moved with mechanical certainty, hydraulics hissing, then locking with a decisive clang that echoed across the lot. The sound marked an end more clearly than any ceremony ever could. Sydney drove on, past the perimeter, past the last guard post, into the fading light. There was no applause waiting, no audience, just the road ahead and another mission already taking shape. If you followed this story to the end, consider subscribing to the channel. More stories of quiet professionals, hard truths, and earned justice are on the way.